Thank you very much, Pavel. And now, floor for a discussion. So, before we start, may I please request the speakers to speak into the microphone, turn the red button on, and then speak into the microphone so that our interpreters are able to assist with the interpretation. Our first speaker is from a civil society, trade union, academic, multi-stakeholder group. So that's one cluster. It's rather messy, but important. So I will call upon Mr. Dominic Renfrey from the ESCR Net. 2 minutes or under, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The full acronym being the International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We are a movement of 230 organizations and social movements and individuals from around the world promoting and pushing for the recognition and respect for economic, social and cultural rights. I would like to fully support, firstly I should say this panel has been wonderful and I thank the moderation and the United Nations for hosting this. But I want to fully support some of the statements that have been coming through the meeting ever since Debbie so wonderfully delivered her presentation, and it's been supported on the panel by Juana Cueto from Connect Us and others. I just want to speak directly to the civil society organizations for 1 second and then ask a question and pose it back to you based on the presentation you made this morning. I realize I've taken a minute already. But, so in support of the call for affected peoples to be, the affected people's approach, if you will, to be heard, I'm going to infer from that that affected people should actually be central to the agenda that we are actually here to discuss. As it is, the question becomes, do affected people believe that the guiding principles, the working group and the forum are the means to address the challenges that they are facing? Have they been asked that question? I'm not saying that the answer is no, but have they been asked in the way that they understand and in a means in which they can input into that debate? After all, there is still no binding international mechanism that requires corporations to be accountable for their human rights abuses. And unfortunately, presently, the trend is for resource allocation in this sphere to go towards allowing businesses and states to understand the guiding principles rather than affected people. So, the International Network for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights next year will be having a People's Forum to allow affected people from our network and beyond to begin to dialogue in this discussion. And we would welcome any interactions that you would care to have with us on that. So I pose the question back to Debbie and Juana, what are we going to do about the situation that you have drawn attention to? I suppose this question should primarily go to Debbie, since you so famously posed it to us all rhetorically from the stand yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take about 3 or 4 questions, and I'm going to call upon Neeli Safavi, who comes from the business consultants groups from BP. Neeli Safavi, yes.
Yep. Sorry.
Go
Hi.
ahead, please.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Yes. Yep. Great. So I think you've all raised some very important points today, and I'd like to personally thank you for doing so. I work for BP on the implementation of our human rights commitments, and just a comment and then a question, really. We're committed to supporting the UN Declaration on Human Rights and to complying with and aligning our operations with the UN guiding principles. Our commitments to respecting the rights of communities, suppliers, and freedom of association are outlined in our Code of Conduct. And I know it's not enough to be in the Code of Conduct, it's about implementing that. And we are committed to implementing that. There are business representatives in this room today, and the reason we came here was to listen to what civil society had to say. Yesterday I sat in a lot of business-to-business meetings, and that's fine, but I think we're, those of us who are here are committed to human rights, and it's important that we work together. So what I wanted to ask is, how can businesses who are committed to respecting human rights and rights holders work more closely with civil society? How can we create that safe space? Arit van Heerden of the FLA spoke about this yesterday and how it was done to a certain extent in the labor movement back in the 1990s, to create that safe space where we recognize that all of us have a role to play, business representatives, civil society, even governments, and that we all, if we can respect and trust the positions that we're coming from, could perhaps create a way that we can achieve justice for victims and that we can prevent any further potential and actual impacts to their rights. So I'm really interested to hear what you all have to say from your significant experience on how we could create that safe space.
Thank you very much. And the next question is from Louisa Barbie from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Louisa.
Thank you. Yes, I'm working for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and we work in South and Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Central Asia, and also now in Middle East and North Africa. By the way, thank you very much to the member of the working group that he mentioned for, the first time during the business forum, the EBRD. I'm working as a civil society advisor for the bank, and actually my role is to identify civil society organizations that are working in our region that would like to, to engage with the bank. So I would like to ask to those participants from civil society organizations working in the EBRD region to approach me after the session if interested. And then there is a lot of discussion now internally in the bank regarding how to facilitate the dialogue between our business clients and civil society organizations. So my question is very close to the one of my colleague from BP. So how could, according to you, international financial institutions in partnership with civil society work for the implementation of the guiding principles? And I would like, some practical example. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one last question in this cluster, and I am going to ask David Allen from Spectrum to, in 2 minutes or under, to come up with his question. David Allen. Yes.
Hello, I'm David Allen. I've been working in Myanmar for 7 years on many of the sorts of issues that Debbie responded to. I'll thank the panel very much for their comments. I'd also like to compliment Debbie on what I thought was the most moving speech that I heard during the conference yesterday. I can't condone some of the issues that are taking place in Myanmar at present. I just want to say up front, this is a deplorable situation and it very much goes into the grievance and remedy situation. But I do want to add some supplementary comments on some of these things. And there's a question in here as well. So I guess as a statement, first of all, reform in Myanmar is going to take some time. We're talking about a 60-year history of things. So the question of the panel is, how can a transition period be properly accounted for? Now, I'll make just a few supplementary comments in my 2 minutes. Control of security forces in the face of investment is an absolute massive, massive issue. You're talking about the largest military in Southeast Asia of over 500,000 people, plus the police. To my knowledge, there's only one organisation has started doing anything about the question of military reform process in Myanmar. This is a tough one. Commenting on the bullet points and bullets point, I think one of the things I mentioned in an earlier session was that actually working with government, industry and civil society groups together, we tried to develop some simple recommendations for some principles that could be taken forward, and that came up with 7 recommendations, and I'll make that available for the session as well. Further point, there was a lot of discussion on land consent issues. I'll say that of the publications that we've done in Myanmar, the hottest selling one that actually was the best-selling publication in the country for 2 months was some information on lead up to the Mitsone Dam issue, and we know where that went with, based on citizen support, the President suspended the project. The next best publication that we have at this point, that's in Myanmar language and 14 ethnic languages as well, is on free, prior, informed consent work. So I'll say that while what this is doing at present, it's hard to say, but let's say there's enormous public and citizen interest in these areas, and I think that's going to work. I should say those 7 points I referred to previously, they specifically refer to the guiding principles and hopefully have something to say there. So I'll also say that things have improved a lot in terms of public voice and media interaction. So things like these recommendations, these were published in the Myanmar press. Now, this is the sign of something changing. Anyway, so, and I guess as a final comment, the constitution will be reformed at some time in Myanmar. So preparation for that is a very, very important thing. And I guess in some of the recommendations we've seen, we'd really like to see reference to the guiding principles in the Myanmar constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to request the panelists to take one question each. So if Sergey can take the question on the BP, and if Juana can take the question from Dominic from the ESCR net, Debbie, if you can address David Allen's question, and that leaves us with Wellington. And Wellington, if you can take Louisa's question on how can financial institutions and CSOs work together. Thank you. Please keep your responses brief so we can have more questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for question. My first answer to the representative of BP company. Of course, I'm familiar with your activity in the Caspian region because you work in the Azerbaijan. And if you look at our last report devoted to Azerbaijan, you may find some information about BP activity. My suggestion, just to fulfill national and international law, and it is all. It is all. And don't be in special relations with leadership of our countries, especially authoritarian regime. Just fulfill obligation, legal obligation, and to respect human rights, not in votes and your website, and reality as well, because you have problem in Azerbaijan too. And about bank, I'm familiar with EBRD activity and so on, I hope. And my suggestion will be, don't support, especially using by public monies, our monies, to support controversial project in the region, especially in oil and gas sector. If you look at example with Karchaganak oil and gas field and case of Berezovka, there is great example when after the support of international financial corporations, there was huge scandal. With public money in this project, there was big communication with IFC without result, and our compliance to the Office of Ombudsman. Don't support the controversial project, and the same, just to fulfill national, international law. Because through our communication with Office of Ombudsman in some of our compliance, it was in the second compliant, Office of Ombudsman rejected our remarks to fulfill national legislation. This escape this question in the compliant. And it is all. Thank you.
Sí. Sobre la cuestión de...
On the issue of the participation of affected groups, I'm going to be very honest. Yesterday when Rosa was telling us about the process of the lack of answers and of all the cases at the United Nations when she didn't receive an answer, I thought that we really had taken the appropriate decision to effect to welcome her to the panel, because there are many groups that do not have access to justice and often hit up against a wall. They don't receive any answers. I think that we have the responsibility of explaining what possibilities there are for victims. And we are taking too long in providing them answers. Now, about the question about what we can do. I was speaking to a colleague about this, and I think that the most important thing is to be able to improve surveillance and to assist in concrete cases. For example, we can receive the reports about what guiding principles are doing in my region, and I think that in this line, many groups working in human rights need to know how to report better about violations of businesses. Yesterday, there was also an important element that came up, which was the access to information. Here we are speaking about the implementation of guiding principles, and this aspect of access to information can definitely be improved to enhance implementation. And here I'm thinking about access to environmental impact reports, thinking about the year to come. Yes, I think that this is what we need to do: improve monitoring, surveillance, and ensure information to all affected parties.
Jyoti, I'm so upset. You confined me to answering only one question. I'm sorry. I would love to answer everything. But David, I can understand it. Thank you very much for your kind comments. In fact, thank you everybody who commented very nicely on what I said yesterday. I thought I was doing something that was actually quite normal. So, and I'm mindful of the fact that the cases I cited were only tip of the iceberg. There are many people who were tortured and killed who are not even recorded. So that's a burden that we all carry with us. When we talk about the transition and taking time, firstly, I really believe just getting out of bed every morning is complicated. But if you have political will, any kind of complication is manageable. And it's not like the authorities are not aware of what needs to be done. What I'm concerned about is that the changes that have happened quite rapidly are aimed at dismantling economic sanctions and bringing in new players, new investors into the country. A lot of the focus has been on extractives, which have already caused a huge amount of devastation, as well as garment factories and the use of unskilled labor to capitalize on cheap unskilled labor. My worry is that the focus of the reforms at this stage actually is reigniting conflict. In Kachin state, there was a 17-year ceasefire. And the new war started last year in June, mainly to secure territory for a dam that would be producing hydroelectricity for sale in China, not for consumption, domestic consumption. Similarly, the anti-Muslim hatred, the violence, very scary violence that is still ongoing in Arakan state, which displaced 100,000 people in a matter of days. Now there's another side to it. We are starting to understand that a lot of those zones that were cleared out by racial violence were actually areas which are now slotted for redevelopment, for transformation into office blocks, shopping centers, and so on. And so we see there's a very clear economic motivation for a lot of these hate crimes that's still ongoing. And this is why I'm very concerned that the direction and the pace of the reforms seem to be focused on one main thing. And that is also why it's important for the international business community and all the stakeholders, the international human rights community, to actually say, wait, hang on here. If you don't have transitional justice, how are we going to be clear that we are using land that is not contested by various generations of IDPs? If there is no transitional justice, how can we go in with a clean conscience and a sense of security that our profits are not going to be affected by future litigation? That's something that's really important to be aware of. If there is no transitional justice in a post-conflict situation, how are you sure that investment and business activities are not going to reignite conflict? So finally, when we talk about Burma, I know I sound like an egg, but I'm always saying legislative, institutional, and policy reforms to halt and prevent recurrence of impunity. This is the lesson we learn in Cambodia, this is the lesson we learn in Indonesia, this is the lesson we learn in East Timor, and this is the lesson we are feeling with great pain and anguish in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. Wellington.
Well, this is a difficult question because I'm not a financial expert, but I will try to address it in terms of relations. The first step that should be taken, or the first avoidance that should be taken care of, is for businesses, nations or states and stakeholders to stop the creation of jewel and enclave economies. In this, I mean the thrust currently is to invest in informal economy, which in most cases is 20% of the population, while it's 80% is left outside the functional economy and there is informal economy, particularly in the developing world. And therefore, the financial institutions must also be advised to take care of the other segment of the economy, rather than focusing on the formal economy where issues are already flourishing, leaving out the rest of the population. And we also realize that this kind of approach has been creating elastic societies where rich people are getting richer and poor people are getting poorer. And the result of elastic societies is that from my kindergarten scientific education, is that an elastic will stretch into plasticity. Plasticity will get to plastic limit. When it gets to plastic limit, it will snap. And hence the conflicts in most of the countries as a result of the economic stress. And financial institutions, states, and stakeholders are advised to seriously take note of this development. There's also the issue of where resources should be targeted. Outside the enclave, resources should be targeted at developmental projects rather than consumption-oriented projects, budgetary support versus development. Because 2 years down the line, 10 years down the line, most of the resources are not accounted for if they are targeted towards budgetary support. Have you ever imagined that poor countries, which may find it difficult to look after their own societies, they are heavily equipped in terms of military hardware. And some of the resources are financed from outside these countries. Take, for example, what happened just maybe 2-3 weeks ago in the DRC. There was a display of state-of-the-art equipment from M23. I'm not saying I'm justifying M23 or justifying the government, but the question that comes to mind is that where did the colleagues get the sophisticated weaponry from, just maybe in 2 weeks' time? So we must also look at this. I think in a nutshell, that's what I can say. But I also want to bring to your attention the results of the ITUC survey, global survey, which was done this year, where 53% of the population believe that banks have got influence on their governments in terms of national economic policies. And that large corporations, 29% were saying large corporations have got influence on their governments. In fact, they are running the governments. And only 5% believed that voters have got an influence. It's a sign of a crisis. So it has to be changed in terms of trust and the element of accountability. Hence, the due diligence, we note in the guiding principles that, yes, if they are taken care of, the due diligence will be able to assist us to get somewhere.
Thank you very much to the panelists. We'll take a few more questions from the floor. I'm going to ask M.M. Ukoni from the UPR Coalition of Nigeria. Please be brief with your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, the moderator. A member of the UPR Coalition based in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. And in the Niger Delta, the extractive industry has actually caused massive pollution of the environment. My concern is this. In a situation where impacted local communities with people who are marginalized and abused, how can we use these guiding principles to hold government accountable and also the big corporations that operate in the area accountable? And how can marginalized people who do not even have access to interact and relate with government officials and also the companies have access to remedy when their rights are continued to be abused? What is the guarantee that these guiding principles is going to change the situation and the conditions of local communities in the Niger Delta region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question, I call upon Eddie Tanago from Selkor, Papua New Guinea.
Hello.
Yes. Go ahead.
All right. I'm Eddie Tanago from Papua New Guinea, an NGO called the Center for Environmental Law and Community Rights. I work in the organization as an IFI campaigner and also an extractive industries campaigner. I think Papua New Guinea is one of the rich countries and a blessed country in the world where we own about 99% of the land, which is customarily owned. And the state owns about only 1%, just only 1%. And which is, I think it's an impediment to development. And the government tries every way possible to gain access to the land and to do development, whether it be mining or agriculture or whatever. In the current trend of development, we have a process called a special agriculture business leases, or it's just part of the land grabbing process, in which the government developed. And since 2009, it got a total land of about 5 million hectares of customary land for agribusiness, for agriculture business. So they would do logging. Most of this land were forested land, which again for logging. And then they said it is either for oil palm or cashew nuts or whatever products they think they would do. This is a worry for us at the moment, and I've been listening to FIDH, Debbie, who's been talking about also land grabbing in Burma. You know, I think the state institutions back in our country, it's not working. I'm just wondering how this principle is going to work in there, because the state also is responsible for trying to protect its citizens, and the business is also involved in the country. I'm just wondering how this can be affected, because if both parties are not working, then how is that going to work? It's a challenge for us, especially civil societies and NGO back in Papua New Guinea. I was going to pose a question to Debbie as to, I heard about, you said about the land grabbing as being one of the issues back in Burma. So if you were able to, were you able to gain back some land that was lost, and for the people, and if so, how did you do it? Before I leave it, I would also like to make another comment, which is a development that's currently taking place in the country, which is we've been using as a guinea pig to test us for deep sea mining by Nautilus Minerals, a Canadian company, which we are all against this. So I would like to appeal to every one of us, every civil society in this forum, to go to a page called ECNOW, PNG, and subscribe to it, so would you know more about this project. It's been currently put on hold by the government because of the pressures from civil societies and the public, and some members of the parliament whom we got to be on our side. But I'd just like to appeal to every one of us, every civil society in this forum, to try to assist on that campaign that we are currently working on. So it's a first project in the country, and there's no guarantee that there won't be any environmental damages and pollution to the waterways. So this is just an appeal to all of our civil societies in this room and any interested persons would like to be part of the campaign. Also on the land grabbing issue, there is a report by Greenpeace and a joint report by Greenpeace and Greenpeace PNG on forest campaign, and other civil societies whom we did on the land grabbing issue. It's on a Greenpeace website, PNG forest campaign. So if you want to know more about it, you can go to the website and have a look at the report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm just going to take one last question. And please forgive me, all of those who had put their names down. We are running out of time. I will give a minute each to the panelists to answer or have their final comments, and then Pavel will take a little bit of time, 2 minutes, to wind up. So I'm going to ask Delphine Ressulot from the World Organization Against Torture to raise her question here in the context of affected people. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor and the opportunity to address this very interesting forum and panel today. I just would like to actually support what has already been said today regarding the fact that it's extremely important that special attention and protection is given to environmental human rights defenders in our debates as well as in the framework of the work of the working group. Indeed, environmental defenders are the voice of victims' business-related human rights abuses, and as such, they face a large range of acts of harassments and abuses, both by state and non-state actors, and often in impunity. This will actually already pointed out by the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, Mrs. Sekagia, in her last reports to the Council, and also echoed by the former Special Rapporteur, John Ruggie, who made several recommendations on that aspect. And to that extent, we would like to make sure that special attention is given to such defenders and to formulate several recommendations first to states to make sure that they guarantee in all circumstances the integrity of such defenders, that they give recognition to the legitimate role such defenders play, and ensure that they are able to work without threat of attacks by states or non-state actors, and to combat impunity for attacks and violations against them. We would like also to formulate recommendations to companies to make sure that they guarantee that human rights defenders are consulted and involved in decision-making process related to the establishment of economic-related projects, and that they develop national rights policies in cooperation with defenders, including monitoring and accountability mechanism in case of violations of the rights of defenders. Finally, we would like to formulate recommendations to the working group that it pressures states to fulfill their obligations to protect human rights defenders, that it takes into account and that it builds on recommendations relating to the criminalization of defenders made by other UN procedures, and finally that it pays special attention that to the action of companies that contribute to the criminalization of the action of human rights defenders. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and once again apologies to all of you who have not been able to ask your question, but kindly you can write down that question and give it to us, and we will find ways of responding to it. I'm going to now ask our panelists to respond to the questions as well as make their concluding comments. So Juana, if you could take MM's question as well on the extractive industry from Nigeria, and Debbie, if you could take Eddie's question but also make your concluding comments, and then we'll have Sergey and Wellington. In 1 minute, you know, all of you just say your final last word. So Juana, you'd like to begin?
Okay. The question was how the guiding principles can change the situation. And I think we all know that, I'm sure she knows the answer better than me, and norms don't change the situation by itself, it's people. So the point is how we make people more stronger in this fight. And I think it's a combination of strategies. We still need to improve our work. I don't think we are in the right point, but I think it's a mixture of shaming, and we know companies care a lot about their image, and more. So there's a strong component of shaming, and we need to know how to do those campaigns effectively. I also think that the effective protection and enforcement happens at the national level, so strong national institutions able to enforce rules are important. So we need a strong judiciary and also regulatory bodies that are looking into companies. International standards help because they come and they put more pressure nationally, and it's the same for the international mechanism. They have this boomerang effect, but for sure it's people and a strong national institution. So I really think we have to improve our work nationally. Use what elements come from this international debate, but improve our capacity to work before our governments and to shame the companies in our societies and in the societies where they care about their image. Thank you.
Debbie. Eddie, actually, David is on the ground in Rangoon. A lot of the communities that I work with are in the border areas, in the ethnic minority areas, and they have a different way of reacting and acting for their land rights. Whereas in the central areas, some of the farmers have actually made protests and named and shamed several companies. Their ability to do so also depends on which companies are in political favor with the leaders. So this is something, in some cases they got some financial compensation, but in most cases they did not get their land back. But the guiding principles are useful in the same way that we invoke the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the Millennium Development Goals. They are a useful bullet point to use at this stage. What we really need is a good news case where it is very clear that the guiding principles and the work of the working group was able to achieve a favorable outcome for affected communities. And in the case of Burma, what is really troubling is that the working group was actually refused an invitation to Burma, Myanmar. The other special procedures have been able to gain access to Burma. It's very interesting that what looks like one of the mildest special procedures at this point seems to be the most threatening in the country. Having said that, I have to echo what Juana says. The energy and the commitment of affected people and the solidarity and national and international solidarity is one of the ways we still have. That is the main weapon in our arsenal. That is more important than the bullet point. And I think as a Malaysian, because I'm not from Burma, I've worked on Burma for more than 2 decades, but as a Malaysian, I am aware that Malaysian companies are doing very harmful things to PNG. So we should actually be working together to see how Malaysians can make more noise about the damage that Malaysian companies are doing in that country. Land grabbing is also a very destructive all around in Sri Lanka, in Cambodia, and everywhere else. And what is really horrifying is that in mid-November, just a couple of weeks ago, the ASEAN governments actually adopted an ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which is more about a declaration of the rights of governments, not people. And freedom of association is excluded from those rights. And that should be considered a scandal already. So I think, and I must say that many people on the ground with very few resources, in fact with very little education, have been doing some amazing things. And here are some reports to prove that. But we have to back them up. We have to back them up at the national and regional and international level. That's why we are here. Thank you very much. Sergey, no? Okay. Wellington, any last 1 minute bullet points?
In 1 minute, I would want to emphasize that where there is a will, there is always a way. And to emphasize also that the poorest of the poor are the experts in poverty. And there are prerequisites to that. 1, involve the poor. 2, involve the poor. And 3, involve the poor. And never treat the poor and the downtrodden as any other business. This will ensure social justice and peace everywhere, anchored on social security, quality jobs, and respect for human rights. I thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. I'm going to ask Pavel for a 2-minute roundup. Pavel.
Thanks ever so much. I'd like to express gratitude for our discussion today. I'd like to say a few words about the following. Number 1, I come back to the role of civil society. Some have asked how the guiding principles could be used by communities that have no resource at all and no information. The role of civil society, NGOs, is to help such organizations. Yesterday in plenary, when there was an opening of the forum, we heard one of the panelists say that the states find it most important to retain their sovereignty. But sovereignty shouldn't be a shield under which or behind which human rights are violated. We have to be realistic, of course. States have rules, policies, etc. But for the civil society, they must be more open. Many questions related to the rights of indigenous populations were ignored by states and supported by civil society. This worked in favor of indigenous peoples because NGOs were involved, and I feel that this is the strength of civil society, the fact that there is no borderline between us. We are open, we're ready to defend those who are in a difficult position today. Therefore, some of the conclusions I draw from today's dialogue, well, we heard an appeal that the communities most involved should be at the center of our action and discussion. Number 2, we feel it very important, as Juana said, it is indispensable to create mechanisms for monitoring and following the activities of important corporations in respecting human rights. And I hope our group will endorse this.
Thank you very much. I can see our participants for the next session are coming in. Thank you all. Thank you to the facilitators, Mariette and Chris. And apologies again for those of you who couldn't speak.